All right, welcome to the Deplore Econ chat. I'm Radical Liberation from St. Louis, Missouri, United States, the occupied zone of America, something like that. And we have our usual co-host, Mad Mercenary from Australia.
Hello there.
And we have some special guests, Binary Surfer, who you may know from such videos as Unpopular Opinions.
He would do a highlight reel of the bests, but it'll probably get him banned.
Yeah, right. We had to bury those best bits. And then Don the Pleb showing his full corporate attire.
Of course I am.
Okay, so we're going to touch very quickly on a topic we've been tracking, which is what is the Federal Reserve up to in the midst of, well, we were originally tracking this really in the context of the coronavirus. But now one might say that more has gone on. As someone said in the comments, in fact, let me highlight this. I thought it was a great comment from Martian Pundit. It's been 2 weeks, but it feels like years. Well said, sir. So yeah, what's the Fed been up to, Mad Merc, recently?
Okay, the Fed. As you guys know, we've been having a look periodically at the Fed's balance sheet and the asset side of the balance sheet, and we've seen that grow through their stimulus packages and introducing liquidity into the system. And currently, the Fed's balance sheet is very close to, but hasn't yet reached, $7.2 trillion. That's from the at the start of this, it was just above $4 trillion. So
this is going to be a dumb question. Is that a British trillion or an American trillion? Because they're different. You're on mute.
This is U.S.
Sorry,
U.S. dollars.
Could you say that again?
U.S. dollars.
U.S. dollars.
Yeah, but
yes.
sorry, it's the commonly used American trillion is what we're talking about.
Oh, sorry. Trillion can mean more than one thing.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a million billion, right?
Yeah, that's what I thought we were talking about. Just checking.
Yeah.
But USD is what he was going at. But more importantly, when you say the start of this thing, do you mean, 8 weeks ago when we started just lighting money on fire for the coronavirus?
Oh, yeah.
It's a little more than 8 weeks, isn't it? It's been a couple months.
In the UK, it's 11 weeks we've been in this now. So.
Oh, okay.
So they started introducing. Perhaps we should bring the link up because we have been introducing. They started introducing liquidity back into the system before coronavirus, but then when coronavirus hit, it just went up to ludicrous levels, and now I don't know how this is keeping the system going. I mean, this is just duct tape and super glue and
so as a quick average, if it is roughly 11, 12 weeks, does that mean we're going at about the rate of $1 trillion a month? Am I doing that right?
Yeah, give or take. Yeah,
just in the recent months. Yeah, you're right. We're looking at something like that. It's really insane.
And bear in mind, what we don't have yet is the economic contraction in context, or the long-term economic contraction in context of that.
Right.
Ooh, it's going to be bad.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes. I'm not optimistic. Okay, so thank you, Mad Merc. So I want to make a few introductory comments. So, hopefully the topic is obvious. Companies are falling over themselves to be in line with the latest left-wing fad. This is not the first time. I don't know if anyone is around our parts is shocked, oh, I just couldn't believe that big company would jump on the latest thing. And we've been watching this, right? We've been tracking it. Now the whole world can see it in case they missed it, that this idea that, the radical left is in opposition to the big companies, right? They are just at loggerheads, nothing a big company hates more than those terrible Marxists out on the streets. Who can believe this story now, right? As Academic Agent has put it so well, how can you be a radical when you're pushing at an open door, right? So there's something fishy going on. That's pretty much kind of what we want to talk about. But before we get into that, I just want to make a few comments on the relationship between free market economics and the big companies. because there's a lot of confusion on this, especially on sort of the extremes of the left and the right, it so happens. So real quick, when the left or the far right, I've found out, here's the free market, it seems like this is what they think you're for. If you say, I'm for the free market, they think you mean, I'm for big business, I'm for ever more monopoly until by and large runs everything. I'm for special privileges for business, that, you know, state granted privileges to big business. I'm for the commodification of everything. I'm for grinding every form of social relation down until the only way relate is atomized individual to other atomized individual through money exchanges. Okay, so what's wrong with this story that I run into constantly?
Everything.
Yeah, right. So remember, I'm going to refer to some degree to the classical liberals who were really the original ones pushing a free market view, starting a couple hundred years ago. Remember, it was actually the classical liberals that gave the term monopoly the bad connotation that it still has in everybody's ears. And they were the ones fighting against it, most famously with the Anti-Corn Law League. Some people who don't understand all this get confused when free market and libertarian folks are critical of big business. They don't understand that the fight against special privileges for big business isn't like a thing that we pretend to pay lip service to because it's fashionable. No. It started with the classical liberals. It's at the very root of free market economics, classical liberalism. We were the ones who started that. We were the ones who said, look, when you get a special grant from the king that you're the only one who can, you know, process silk in England or whatever, that's wrong. It's unjust. It causes bad effects. And of course, with the Anti-Corn Law League, it was a little more than just, you know, being economically inefficient. It was keeping regular, hardworking but poorer folks from having access to affordable food. So it was, you know, like causing people to starve to death, right? So it was not just a. Sometimes I think free market economics is viewed as sort of, you know, we want to have the taxes slightly lower, or we would like the economy to be a little bit more efficient. Sure, but really, what animated the original free market economists, original classical liberals, were vast injustices that cost people their lives, right? So that's really what the roots are. So anti-market people have confused all this by making themselves out as the only ones that care about abusive behavior by business. You know, only socialists really care about big business being bad, right? They also paint it this way is because they say the only way to address these abuses is through progressive or Fabian socialist legislation, right? Like laws giving unions special privileges, regulating monopoly. And by the way, whenever you see the government talk about monopoly, they've redefined it from what we originally meant by it, we liberals originally meant by it, to mean something that makes no sense. Free market folks have been critical of this kind of legislation. That's confused people. They're like, hey, look, the bill says it's the anti-monopoly, regulate the economy for the good of the people bill. How could you be against that? Well, okay, let me tell you real quick, and then we'll turn to our main topic. It's the market process that we've been championing all along, not any big business per se, right? It's not about, you know, being pro General Electric or General Motors or whatever. It's about championing the free market process. And so, as it turns out, we found that when these kinds of laws and regulations get passed, which are supposedly going to make the market function better and stop the abuses, what in fact happens is something we call regulatory capture. This is well observed by this point. There's a whole economic journal, and that's pretty much all they cover in that economic journal, is the issue of regulatory capture. And that's where the industry being regulated always ends up effectively regulating itself through this, commission on utilities or whatever, through revolving door practices and the simple fact that no one's going to care as much about the regulatory body as the industry that's getting regulated by that regulatory body. No one's going to have sleepless nights over that, what that body's doing, except for the people in that industry. So they're going to do everything they can to influence that thing. And it's not going to be a check on them or regulate them. It's going to end up giving them special privileges is what it does, and locking in the current players to the detriment of the free market process, which is the thing that really benefits everybody. So having said all that, I say all that because I see this with Tom Woods as well. He says, I have to explain over and over again to the libertarians who just walked in the door and don't know any history and don't know anything, that I'm allowed to be critical of big business. In fact, it's a tradition for us, libertarians and classical liberals. We have always been critical of big business when they are doing something that's wrong, unjust. In particular, and the most important thing usually being that the state is granting them a special privilege to pollute, to abuse people, to put the costs of what they're doing on others persistently. All that kind of stuff is the stuff that we've been opposed to. And it just so happens the lack of love goes the other direction. Big businesses have not been huge champions of the free market. And this goes way back. And I think we've talked before on the show about big American businesses helping fund the Bolsheviks after the Bolshevik Revolution. Believe it or not, but it's true. Look it up. I'm forgetting the particular businessman in my mind, but they were even backing Marxists back then 100 years ago during the Bolshevik Revolution. So in a way, what we're talking about feels new, and all the rebranding and getting rid of Aunt Jemima and all the woke stuff that's going on. But in another way, there's nothing new about this at all. And we've seen big business having these weird alliances with radical leftists for a long, long time. And it just, history repeats itself. So having said that, how about this? Let's do a quick round robin. Tell me your favorite example of something a company has done. By favorite, I mean the thing made you seethe the most, maybe, or you thought that was funniest. Your favorite example of something a company has done in the recent weeks. Don, why don't we start with you?
Well, my favorite thing that's happened in the past couple of weeks is Domino's telling everybody to pound sand because they liked Domino's liked the tweet from the press secretary. Is it really that big of a deal that we said thank you to a customer who complimented us? And quite how much support they've gotten in kind of the opposite direction. I mean, it's a take your pick scenario. Everybody has virtue signaled as hard as possible.
So that's interesting. Didn't it turn out that actually had been an exchange with her 8 years ago or something before she was press secretary?
It was 2012, and she was still in college. Nobody knew who she was.
But nevertheless, they could have bent the knee in some fashion. You're saying they just never did, as far as you know.
No, whoever the guy is that most of Twitter, or at least my feed, seems to really be going after right now, he's the one that said, Domino's, you ruined your brand. Domino's answered him with, well, look, we thought somebody was complimenting us, so we would just say thank you. I'm sorry you think that's a problem. And just the internet swamped that guy. It was amazing.
Oh, okay. So he got a little ratio there?
More than a little. People started going back and playing the same game with him, apparently around the same time, almost the exact same time. He was saying, Domino's, you ruined your brand. Him and his wife had gone out boating, and she posted pictures on Instagram of their ice chest that had a Confederate flag on it. And they were like, oh, really, guy? You want to play this game?
Yeah. Now, I hope I'm not giving too much credit to binary, but at least in my mind, I associate the phrase "it's projection" every time with the binary surfer. Is that yours, or are you just?
Yeah, I can't claim the original of it. I don't actually know who said it first, but the more and more psychology you read, the more you realize that the thing that drives people the craziest is seeing a part of themselves they don't like in someone else. And that's what I mean by it's always projection. And if we want to go to a non-economic example, the classic one is you have a very vocal male feminist who's, what was that comedian who recently came out as super uber duper male feminist, and turned out he raped 2 women about 12 years ago.
Oh,
Before he was famous, and it
All
came
of
out
them?
within days. You know the one I mean.
I don't know. I don't
All
know.
of them?
I think Mad Mark here is basically right. Every time one of them does this, that is exactly what happens. It is all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, pretty much exactly that. At this point, can we think of a Hollywood celebrity who hasn't at least had something insinuated about them, with the notable exception of, by the sound of it, Downey Jr., who, the more you look back through his history, he keeps making veiled references to this kind of stuff, like pedophilia in Hollywood, all the rest of it. And he keeps making little veiled jokes at it, not aimed at anyone in particular. There's an article about it a couple of months back. It's fascinating. I would believe he maybe isn't involved because of how long he's been taking the piss out of it. But
There is a scant few that I don't know of, them being involved in this sort of thing. Keanu Reeves comes to mind. I don't recall anybody going after him. The guy from he was in the I don't even remember what he was in anymore. But he was the fat guy in Parks and Rec. There we go. That all the memes are about. Whatever that guy's name is. Him, I seem to recall. There's nothing about. But I mean, it's really the short list.
And think about it, Tom. What of all those people have in common? Not one of them has virtue signaled loudly about anything that I'm aware of, anyway.
That's not quite true. The guy from Parks and Rec, he did sort of virtue signal about something, but it was a very right-wing thing. He came out a few months back. No, well, yeah, that too. But he came out and he was the guy that did that speech that was like, read your Bible. I don't care if you think religion's the worst thing in the world. There are good values in this, and at least we can take the good value. And he got a bunch of hate for it. And of course, the right supported him gigantically. But that's as close as I've got to anybody virtue signaling about anything.
That's what I mean. I think people who have nothing to feel guilty about don't virtue signal. I mean, it's one thing to just say, okay, I support a cause. Fine, but it's the people who are really vocal. The more vocal you are, the more suspicious I get, basically.
I have to say, one of the surprises to me, and you guys are probably going to burst my bubble here, but I mean, everyone knew it was a big part of the campaign brouhaha with Trump. Everyone knew that, you know, this guy was not a celibate man, shall we say, in his life.
Was it his third wife he was on before he ran?
Right, yeah, exactly. As far as I can tell, he actually has never had any tolerance for pedophilia type behavior. He kicked Epstein out of his club, his golf club or whatever, or his hotel or whatever, because the guy was hitting on young girls. And this goes back before, you know, he had all this scrutiny from running for president. And I saw a little graph, I think I put it in my Twitter stream. It showed that the arrests of this kind of crime shot way up under Trump, way up, like 3 times as much as under Obama.
Oh, so there's a reason for that.
Okay.
The Department of Homeland Security got really, really muzzled under Obama. And one of the first things Trump did that was really quiet, but I'm not quite first day in office, but like the first couple of months when he was doing all those interviews with cops and everything that were hitting the news, is he went down to DHS and FBI and he said, so what do you guys have a problem with? And they said, well, we're not allowed to track down pedophiles anymore for some reason. So he reactivated the group in DHS that was there to track down pedophiles. It was
I did not know this.
It was scaled down to like 1 or 2 guys who were basically just filing paperwork for all the old cases, buffed them up to 100 and something people, if I remember correctly, and said, go ham, go after these people. These are the worst people on earth. So
wow, no kidding. Okay, so he took real action.
I can believe that. I heard a different story about Trump actually, and it came from, I forget her name, and I really wish I could remember it. She's an American Chilean investigative journalist. She's one of the last, as far as I can tell, really genuine investigative journalists. She writes independently, and a lot of the, if we can consider anything reputable, but a lot of the less crazy mainstream sources frequently cite her. I'll look her name up later and post it on my Twitter because she deserves a mention. But she did a detailed expose into Epstein, and she found out the thing they fell out over originally was a real estate deal in New York. Epstein went to Trump for advice on the deal. Trump basically gazumped him and stole the deal out from under him, if you believe their research. They then had a falling out over that, and then he found out he was diddling young girls at Mar-a-Lago or whatever the golf club was. So I think that was the nail in the coffin on their friendship then, by the sound of it. And she does good work. Her stuff is exhaustively researched. She wrote I think it was 12-page article about Epstein. Real in-depth stuff sourcing.
I actually, Binary, you might not know this, but I actually kind of try to collect independent journalists. So on Twitter, I find out about them and see them referring to each other and stuff. And I follow them and actually keep a Twitter list of I think I just call it independent journalists, something like that. That is, there are still a few real journalists around. They're not all right wing or left wing or anything like that. They just, there's some honest actors out there, and you can find them. Sargon and I have been loving Michael Tracy lately, but I've been following him for years. But there's others. But anyway, Binary, name a favorite corporate action.
To cut Binary off appropriately for this exact criticism, rip me not being an independent journalist.
Okay,
yeah,
Binary.
There's a whole different discussion there, isn't there, about journalism? I'll have to have another day. But I've got two, actually. The Lego one was the one that I had a good laugh at, but there's probably a serious...
This was the police, Lego police, right?
Yeah, well, they basically told their, I don't know what you would call it, affiliates, resellers, whatever, you no longer have license to sell this. We want all our products back, essentially. I don't know how many millions that would have cost them. A lot of money, because we're talking, hundreds of thousands of units here, probably. But they basically went, we're not going to sell any police action figures. I forget. One was like kind of redneck policeman. There was another like classic UK policeman, and there was something else in there. I just thought, well, what is the point in doing that? Well, we don't want to endorse the police. You're selling toys. It's a fucking toy. Excuse my French. The other one that I thought was a little bit more sinister was the one that Apple did. Did you see that?
Oh no, and I'm a big Apple guy, by the way.
$100 million
for Apple.
Oh no, not the donation. Apple basically, iTunes app has different sort of radio stations and streams on it. I don't use it, but I know people that do. It shut off all the stations for Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday afternoon last week, and just had a single stream that played over and over and over again. Fuck the Police, which was NWA's was it 1990 classic, the one that talks about talks about bloodbaths of cops. I'm not kidding you. You can look it up. I think I saw it first on the FT.
Wow. You're talking about like corporate incitement to violence.
Basically, yeah. Played nothing with that for an afternoon.
That's taking it to
Just
another.
remember,
And it's like a 4-minute track, so work out how many in an hour, then go 6 hours worth.
Just remember, guys, that's not 2 minutes of hate at all.
Yeah.
No. Apparently, it's 2 hours of hate.
Yeah. Matt,
and anyone doubts me, check it. It was on the FT a couple of days ago, maybe 2 weeks ago.
To see that. Mad Merc, did you have anything that jumped out at you?
I had Starbucks, and Starbucks was hilarious to me because they got screwed over both times. Don's already laughing because he knows what's happening here. They originally stuffed it up with Black Lives Matter by saying that their employees can't wear any thing that supports the Black Lives Matter movement or the protests. They get backlash from that, and then they do a 180 and say, well, we're coming out with a uniform with a bunch of Black Lives Matter phrases and slogans on it, and our people will be able to wear that. And so then they get backlash from the people who don't support Black Lives Matter. And the people who do support Black Lives Matter already hate them, so they don't care about the response. So it's glad to see that Starbucks hasn't learnt from their kicking those two men out of the toilet, whatever that, what was that, a year ago? They haven't learned from that. That was amazing. It was just great to see.
On that topic, Matt, did you see the genius 4chan trolling going on in this?
No, I didn't. What was that?
I'll pick my favorite one. You have those discount barcodes that they scan on your phone at the till. So, like, you get a free coffee and you scan it. Well, it turns out that you can abuse those horrifically. So 4chan put out one saying, if you support BLM, go to Starbucks. Starbucks is giving away frees these, I can't remember what they're called, but they're like the super luxury large coffees with cream and everything.
Right.
For anyone who say I support BLM, I've got a voucher, and scan it. And what it actually does is tell the till to tell the cashier, this is a robbery, say nothing, put the money in the bag, or I'll kill everyone.
Oh no.
It was
That
brilliant.
is amazing.
And a bunch of people used it as well. You can imagine what happened.
They deserve
was
everything they got. They deserve everything they got from that. What idiots.
So I mean, you say they don't remember from, or they didn't learn from kicking the two people out of the bathroom, whatever it was, all that time ago. But before that, they started that thing where they would write on the cups like a racial conversation or whatever, and we should have an in-depth conversation about race with our customer. So Starbucks simply does not learn. There's not like one or two times. They've done this a bunch of times.
This is the time, by the way,
how does a company they get screwed from both ends? All right, they don't choose one path. They don't support the BLM. They don't just stay silent. They don't go against it. They try and have it every way, which way possible, and they get screwed every way, which way possible. It's just
Starbucks talent.
This is the time to drop the ubiquitous, the regular link that Academic Agent has planted in my head, and I sought these out, and I'm glad I did, and that's why I mention it. Frame Game Radio. You have to kind of hunt around because he lost his channel or something like that, but you can find them. Frame Game Radio videos where he starts with that Starbucks incident from a couple years ago with the two guys being kicked out of Starbucks or attempting to kick them out, and he analyzes it, and it's shall we say prophetic from what we've been seeing these days. Okay, so let me put this out here, and then Binary, I'm going to want you to react to this first. Let me put this out here. I'm running a company, a big company, say. And I'm seeing how, you can piss off half the country, the red states, if you do this, and you piss off the blue states if you do that. This doesn't look like a winning game, right? It's like war games. The only way to win is not to play. So I decide I'm just going to not do politics. I'm going to just stay away from it. Like Apple actually was very non-political under Steve Jobs. They didn't have lobbies in Washington, D.C. They didn't make political statements as a general thing. They just made products, and then that changed under Tim Cook. So let's say I want to be like Steve Jobs. I just want to make good stuff for my customers, all the customers, red state, blue state. I don't really care about your politics. Do you like the thing I make? I'm glad to take your money for it. Why don't people follow this path? What's coming at them, Binary, that's keeping them from doing what to me seems like the obvious thing to do is just stay out of it?
Good question. I think there's an economic argument and there's a psychology element to it that I've been pondering for a while. I'm not saying this is right, but here's where my head's at with it. I think that a lot of companies just blunder along making money without any real vision behind what they do. Sure, they have a product. I'm talking about genuine vision, innovation, change, etc. And I think there's something particularly in the younger mindsets. You're talking about the people who would, probably be 40 or younger type age, typically, where they are seeking meaning or fulfillment from work where they're not getting it. I think there is an element of that occurring here where they are trying to attach themselves to a moral course that gives their work some form of meaning because it supports something. But on the economic side, I'm not sure is the honest answer. I've got a couple of different theories. One of them is about market share and locking it in. So going for a portion of the market, whatever portion that you decide you're going to get is the woke side, or enough people that will go along with it and nod and smile. The one that I could never make sense of was the Gillette example a while ago, if you remember that one. Gillette, be better, all the rest of it. You're a razor company literally turning around and telling men they're evil. There was no upside to that one that I could see. You're a very small proportion. But
there's been debate, but some people feel like they really did lose money over that. And they didn't say, we're sorry we did that because we lost all that money. They were like doubling down, right?
But I do think there's an element of it. someone has made a calculation somewhere on some poll, survey, market research that this will make us more money or gain us more market share than it loses us, is my suspicion. I suppose the more cynical view on that would be, actually, there's no rhyme or reason. They're just trying to point the mob in another direction. Generally speaking, from what I've seen, marketing teams, and I work quite closely with one where I am now to do lots of stuff, they use polling, surveys, research before putting out new positions for the entity that I work for. And I've seen similar in commercial companies. So it would seem unlikely it's just a cynical or rogue marketer trying to point them at the next company to avoid the flak hitting their Twitter feed. I think it's a calculated decision for some reason.
Well, I want to rewind to one of your earlier points, and then we'll get into the economic stuff, right? Since that's what the show's about. The Semiagog is in the comments, and he says, to your point, I think, yes, see work as pseudo-religion trends like fifth discipline style junk. And then he says, also see B Corps. B Corps. I hope you know what that means, because I don't.
Not a fan, but I'll have a quick look.
Okay. Yeah, but I do know what but this thing about that I think you're both referring to, which is it's sort of the death of God problem, right? That Nietzsche talked about. If there's a vacuum that had been filled previously with Christianity for most of the West, right? If there's a vacuum there, what does it get filled by? It seems to me politics has become a religious alternative for a lot of people. They find the kind of transcendent meaning that they would have found spiritually at one time in politics.
I think you're right. I think there would have been a point where, rewind to the generation of our fathers, someone who was probably in the working world predominantly between, call it, 60 something and the OOs, roughly speaking. They typically had pretty secure jobs for life. They bought into a company mentally, not all of them, but a much greater proportion than we have now. And there was an element of meaningful work and kind of an identity that formed around that. You look at my father, who was originally trained as a mechanical engineer. That was kind of his identity with other mechanical engineers for a good portion of his career. I think a lot of these people are just, as you say, there's that human religion-shaped hole in the human psyche, and they're desperately trying to fit something into it. I don't know if you watched any Simon Sinek.
Well, because of you, a little bit, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, there's some good stuff in there, and Sinek talks a lot about this. I think he's got a point in that the toil to reach the top is part of it, yet these kids don't see it as a value. And I think there's something coming through in that with corporations now. I see it a lot with our graduate intake, where they want work to be more than work. They need it to fill some sort of other gap a lot of the time in their lives. I'm not describing it very well, but B Corporation, by the way, is, as I understand it, a corporation that aims to do social good as well as make money. So it's a good example would be like Fair Trade Coffee. Sorry, go on, Don.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
No, Don, you go first. You spoke. Go
Oh,
ahead.
I was just going to say all of them. I mean, every single corporation that I know of has some do-gooder policy, and that's been the case for at least 20 years.
No, I think I get what you're saying, Don. What I'm trying to say is these are corporations set up for the express purpose of social good. So a good example would be a bank set up to purely do ethical banking, say, as opposed to a bank that makes overtures to do ethical banking. Does that make sense?
So it sounds binary, like it's almost a cross between like an NGO and a traditional company. They're trying to kind of do both at once or something.
Yes, that would be a good thing. It's baked into their very core of being.
Yeah.
So the best and most pertinent example I know of this at the moment is how Andrew Yang made his money. Is he decided he was going to start a corporation that was going to go out and sort of get government grants as well as private grants so that they could start these initiatives for technology to make people's lives better. So whatever he tells you about being a great businessman, not really. Right?
Yeah, no, right. And just jumping in here, someone who is I presume I'm the only one here under 40. I don't know about Don's age or Binary's age, but
Yeah, not for long. Not for long.
Yeah, not for long
okay.
here either.
As someone who's probably is the youngest person here, I really can relate to, not personally, but my generation, I think can really relate to the lack of religion. I'm not hugely religious myself, but I think the lack of religion has left that religion-shaped hole in a lot of people, especially within the younger generations. And I see it really in the humor that's expressed in the generation. So there's a lot of not just self-deprecating, but self-destructive humor.
Nihilism. The word is nihilism.
Yeah. Like stuff about how you want to kill yourself and how, well, there's no meaning. Let's just fucking go out the back and end it. Excuse the language. But I think it really does come from there is nothing in the current generation that's permanent. So, for example, I've already had 3 jobs. By the time I'm turning 21 now, I've had 3 jobs. I've been working since the age of 14. There's nothing really permanent. There's no real sense of community. There's no real sense of, long-term fulfillment in life, and everything's self-destructive. And I think what's trying to replace all this, and especially through the educational system, what they're trying to replace this with is, social responsibility. We have corporate social responsibility within these companies and trying to express some values through these companies rather than values through your own personal responsibility in your own life. I know that's a rambling thought there, but
just quickly, Don, before you do that, I'll shut up in a second. Just
go ahead.
You are onto something there with the number of jobs. I've actually studied this at length. I've written a business paper on it a few years ago. The average number of employers someone from my parents' generation would have been about 3 to 5, typically speaking. The kids coming out of school now are going to have somewhere north of 20 throughout their working life on average.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
this next generation.
different.
Yeah. So I think there's something in that. Go on, Don. Sorry.
So that's what I was talking about with the. Sorry, but that's what I was talking about with. Okay. There's no permanence, and there's no real meaning or fulfillment. That's why they're pushing towards these sort of social responsibility ethics to fulfill that hole. Go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. So we are what we're all talking about here is if the Marxists were in control and the workers had seized the means of production, all of these are great reasons, right? So a lack of permanence in job, it not being fulfilling. These are all worker-related issues. They're not particularly good reasons for corporate boards to buy into this game where they're doing the woke thing. I mean, the assumption there almost has to rely on the idea that like they surveyed, Bob the janitor, and Bob was like, yeah, man, we should totally get behind Black Lives Matter. If you've ever worked in corporate America or corporate anywhere, they could not care less what the janitor thinks, right? Unless you happenstancely pull one olive out of every meal in, airplane food, and that saves them $1 billion. They don't care at all what you think, and there's nothing you can do to make them. So don't get me wrong. I think that's what you guys are talking about here is why the workforce is into it, why they are out there in that search for meaning. I have, of course, in the way that Don always has particularly unpopular opinions that and chat decides that they hate me, but I have my own little pet theory about why this is happening. And it sort of goes back to the Sherman Antitrust Act, because basically what we taught companies with the Sherman Antitrust Act is that if you get too big, we'll take you to court, we'll break you up, then we'll subsidize you, then we'll put you in complete control of the industry, as Radley was talking about earlier, by giving you a regulatory body who just listens to you at all times, right? And so getting on the woke train, I think, is an indicator that corporate everywhere thinks that the socialists are going to win. And if you go look in socialist countries, you find one brand of anything on the shelf, right? All those pictures were coming out of Venezuela. There's only one kind of cereal. There's only one kind of razor. There's only one kind of toilet paper. Well, if you're looking at a long-term game and you're saying, well, look, there's only going to be one company left. So if we're the most woke and the Marxists love us the most, it doesn't matter what kind of short-term profit hit we take, because we are the market at the end of this. And I think that's really much more of what's going on here.
You might have a point there, actually.
Right there.
There is something about that. And then, I don't know who's read a lot of William Gibson.
No, I haven't.
Don't even know who that is.
Very famous author who wrote Neuromancer and other cyberpunk novels. Basically, it looks forward into, this is a vision written in the 60s/70s of the OOs, where everyone has implanted chips, brain chips, Elon Musk style. The world's a giant shithole. There's a ton of mega corporations who basically are more powerful than governments. Anyway, coming to the point with it, Gibson articulates the future of exactly what you're describing there. There's a corporation who basically dominates the market almost 100% for each product, and everyone else produces a pale imitation of it, and it's not really worth them competing with each other. So in this, Militech produces all the military weaponry, Arasaka produces all the cars, aircraft, all that kind of thing. It's that kind of vision you're describing, where basically one company has won out for a set of products in an area.
So you are talking Cyberpunk then? I don't recognize Gibson's name, but
Gibson is the guy who wrote all the stuff that Cyberpunk's based on. Basically, he's one of the original Cyberpunk authors.
Gotcha. So the thing I think that he's missing there, and the thing that have read and played a lot of Cyberpunk in my life, the thing that I think Cyberpunk misses is that none of that is going to work without the government forcing it to, right? The Chiquita banana, being everybody's favorite example of a monopoly, could not have done what it did without all of the South American governments coming together, forcibly taking land from people, turning every other company into Chiquita banana, and then literally marching the army out and saying, there's nothing you can do about this. You have to work for Chiquita banana. On and on and on it goes.
Right, and I think what we're getting at here is that monopolies and these sorts of corporate social activism and removing, or at least insulting a segment of your market doesn't work unless you have the backing of the state to as a safety net for your corporation. And I think if you have a look at what was that commie's name that wrote Vampire Economy? He was describing Nazi Germany's economy during the 30s, and he would often go on rail about the fact that German businessmen, as the state's power increasingly had to be reliant upon these bureaucrats and be a part of the Nazi party, and had to toe the party line in order to do business. And some of them did it willingly, some of them tried to leave, some of them but it was all because the state imposed their will and got involved in the market in the first place. And this is a communist saying that. Right,
and I'm thinking about some more recent stuff that's gone on, like the deplatforming, where people were getting, losing their Patreon and so forth, right? And I remember somebody digging into it and finding that behind that was MasterCard, and behind that was, like they kept tracking back, like who's ultimately providing the push for this, and it ended up being the government, if I remember correctly.
The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is the one who is doing this. I guarantee you it's called Operation Choke Point. No, there's almost no evidence that it is going on right now, but all the same people are still in charge. I did do a whole series, of which I'm still waiting on the last video, because Operation Choke Point, or more specifically, that particular section of the FDIC, whose name I'm forgetting, has a pending Supreme Court case. And if they ever get around to ruling on it, I'll finish the series.
Right, yeah. So Operation Choke Point, thank you. I didn't remember the name.
Well, I've seen a government program of this kind that gets rolled back, though. I mean, once they put in this kind of thing, it's basically permanent, isn't it? And what's that phrase you used, Don? Nothing more temporary than nothing more permanent than a temporary government program.
I think I'm stealing that from
Reagan. I think something like that.
It's not Reagan. Reagan. Who's the guy that Sol took classes from?
Milton Friedman.
Yeah, I think I'm stealing that from Friedman.
Yeah. No, I think you are. I think he said in one of his
I looked it up.
His TV programs.
Yeah, Milton Friedman. Nothing is so permanent as a temporary government program.
That's it.
Well said. Right. So, okay. So what have we covered here? We've covered the spiritual vacuum, and what I'm seeing, if you're following Michael Tracy, which I recommend, he's talking about the takeover of media organizations as if they weren't left wing enough. Get ready, because they're kicking out the older guys, so that the young, more woke crew can really have the power. And I was going somewhere with that. Sorry.
We saw that with the New York Times, didn't we, with Sarah Young, who basically is a nobody as far as I can tell. She's not written anything of particular significance or high value.
Right.
She's had virtue of being partly Asian in the right place at the right time, as far as I can tell.
Hold on now. Right. She's tweeted kill all white men hundreds of times. She's written important stuff.
I know where I was going. It's that we originally, the big mistake, right, was, hey, this crazy stuff is just happening on the college campuses. People get out in the real world and they realize, they wake up from that. Well, what we're finding is they get out in the real world and they take a job at a corporation. They take a job at a corporation and they put pressure on the corporation to be woke. That's the
Yes, this stuff was never going to stay in the universities, and this was the danger that many people at the early part of this movement. I mean, hell, this has been in the universities a long time. It just hasn't been this extreme for most of that. I remember getting told about social justice stuff when I was in university, and to give you some context, I was in university before the 00, just about. So it was 20 years ago. This was in there and commonly talked about, but it was relatively fringe. It seems to have now basically expanded to cover all departments, all areas.
This is how I get back to my theory that corporate America or a corporate culture has decided that the Marxists are going to win. Because if what this is the workers showed up and started pressuring corporate America to get woke, then we would have seen what they're doing now 15, 20 years ago. And don't get me wrong, corporations were in fact getting woke. I mean, I've never worked at a company that didn't have a green policy, right? But they weren't doing what they're doing now. And there is a reality that they have gone out to get diversity officers and that sort of thing. Companies have intentionally done this, right? They created positions from nothing. And that sort of thing happened because they kept getting sued, right? And basically the government, by nature of lots of lawsuits happening, said, well, look, either you're going to get this diversity woke nonsense, or we're going to sue you for millions or billions of dollars. And so I think what we're really seeing in the modern era is more the acquiescence, more the agreement that these Marxists are going to win, as opposed to what you saw in even the early 2000s, where you would still get kind of Chad companies be like, fine, we'll pay you $25 million, shut up and go away.
Do you think that basically what we're seeing is the complete lack of pushback to BLM in this case as being the kind of the final crack in the dam where the company's like, well, this thing's going to go.
You got it.
Well, I think that it's not only what you said, Don, which is a surrender almost to these social views, but full on just use of them. So NPR got the Federalist and Zero Hedge, their ads or themselves, the website itself, banned from Google, the search results or something.
Right.
So, this is not just a surrender of these values; it's also the taking advantage of to take out competition.
Well, but look back through history on this. Every time one side wins, what follows is a purge of the other side. The Romans, the Greeks, the pagans, the Christians. This is not new. But once one side wins, the other side gets murdered.
There's another thing that's pretty relevant here. It's the internet, so I'm sure everybody's heard the story of Google, but it was basically started by two guys in their garage, and one of those guys got pushed out of Google. And he was not very woke. And the other one, about the moment that Google started, they got a board, right? And that's how they pushed the first guy out. But the guy that was pretty woke, as soon as they started getting involved in the government, with the government, and as soon as they started trading back information very, very quickly, all of a sudden Google got woke. Prior to that, Google really didn't care. They were exactly what everyone is asking for them to be. And so when you see them do things like deplatform Zero Hedge and the Federalist from their ad program, which is what Mad Merck was talking about, this is really more of an output of the acquiescence to all of this woke culture that came substantially before what we're seeing now.
Right, you got to do the groundwork was laid years ago for this, and this is just the interesting and amazing results of that groundwork that was done.
I'll give you a fun little bit of information about diversity office as well. So without going into too much depth, at least two of you know the specifics of which part of HR I'm in. I do a lot of work with diversity and people who are diversity officers or looking at that kind of thing. Basically, what happens? Yeah,
I'm so sorry.
Let's put it this way: there's a lot of opportunity to ask really awkward questions, so it's good. Which I get a quiet kick out of, to be honest. Asking really, really awkward questions. But here's the key point.
You still have your dick. Just a quick.
Say again.
Just that would be the first question I asked a tranny. Do you still have your dick?
No. I mean awkward questions of like. So how do you calculate that gender pay gap exactly? And you start digging into it and you realize it's bullshit. If it exists, it's about 2 to 3%, things like that. But
you know what you need to do? Just as a peak trolling moment is ask if you can schedule every meeting from now on at 13:50.
13:50. Oh, I'm with you now. I think that might get noticed, but I'll come to the point I was going to make. It's almost like I think I made this joke once before, so stop me if I've made it with any of you. The old concept of fire insurance when the mafia would turn up and go, well, it's a nice business here. It'd be a shame if someone, had an accident and it's expensive to rebuild when your property's been burned down. Isn't it just better to work with us? And that's kind of partly why they exist in that. So here's a good example. My organization has a gender pay gap problem. If it wasn't employing someone to look at that gender pay gap problem, people came around, it would be wide open to the allegations of sexism, etc. As it is, it's employing someone to look at it, so it's a defensible position. You can say, well, we're working on it, we've closed it this number of percent. You basically have a defendable line if you wish to hold it. That's sort of what it exists. It's a sacrifice in revenue and headcount to be able to say, well, look, we're doing something. Whether or not the company actually cares is a different conversation. Whether or not the company actually needs to, it's different conversations. Again, it's about how you calculate it a lot of the time. But it's basically writing off the salary of these people to say, yeah, look, we employ someone to do this. You should be doing it.
Right. Well, I mean, if you pay someone $100,000 a year, you can employ them for a lot of years before it costs as much as a $25 million lawsuit.
I was going to say that,
exactly that.
Living in a big company myself, I'm amazed how much seems to be based around defending from threats. Now, some of those threats are genuine, like hackers, right? And you have to have security and stuff. But there's also the threats I think of as artificial. That is, I don't think they really need to be there. The threats of legislation being used against you, of litigation being used against you. These are very real, very costly, as Don just pointed out. They can be very costly for a company. And what to us seems like they're really, bending themselves into an awkward shape. It might not be completely irrational from a certain point of view, right?
Have you been around?
I'll give you a non. Go on, Don. Sorry.
Have you been around for an OSHA check, Radlib?
No, but I know something about things like that. I was involved with preparing some paperwork for the FDA, so I got a little taste of bureaucracy. There.
So OSHA is probably one of the most disastrous things I've ever seen for companies, because they'll come in, and if you're real friendly with the guy and you get along, then that check is kind of him just walking through the building and you're gabbing along with him, and you better be buying him coffee. And I mean, it sounds like Soviet Russia because it kind of is. But if they decide that you have pissed them off for literally any reason, they'll go around and they'll do things like check desks to make sure they have 4 feet on them, because it's a safety violation if they don't. And they can be there for hours. And just for pissing that guy off can cost you millions of dollars. It's incredible.
Yeah, just for the chat, if anyone isn't familiar, I think Don's referring to occupational safety, health, and environment.
Yep, that's the guys.
Exactly. That's the American.
Also known as the guys who get to decide whether or not your bathroom doors are too far from the desks so you can't have an office, things like that.
Yep.
Let's jump to the chat, because
we don't have anything like, well, we do have something like that in Australia, but we don't have anything to that extent. That is ridiculous.
Well, I'll give you an example from literally today. I spent an hour on a call today where, in similar fashion to what we were talking about a minute ago, someone basically has taken the decision to employ someone on what in US money would be about 130,000 to look at our data compliance, because it's judged that the risk of that is far less than the risk of a couple of £1 million fine if we don't comply and we get called up on and caught by an ex-employee.
And
that's the risk.
And everybody wonders why corporations write off an employee the moment they get sued. Oh, it wasn't our fault. We employed him. It's his fault. You can't get that kind of blood out of that kind of turnip, right? I mean, okay, Bob, I'm going to sue you for $200 million. I got about 20 grand in the bank. It's all yours. There's no $200 million.
Let me jump to the chat. In fact, this one seems very relevant, Binary. Have you considered that HR and marketing departments are cancer? Comments, sir.
Yeah, you're not entirely. So there's a Bill Hicks riff I can do on marketing, which is basically if you're involved in marketing or advertising, kill yourself, kill yourself, kill yourself. Now, no, it's not a joke. Genuinely, borrow a pistol. He does the whole rant on it, and he's not wrong. Equally, I've worked with some brilliant marketers who genuinely try to bring things to life and make it compelling, truthful, and engaging. Like any profession, there's a bunch of hacks who are disingenuous and have sold their souls, and there's a bunch of good people. HR, unfortunately, how do I explain this without going a really long thing? Short version is there's an old version and there's a new version of HR. The old version was there, as we've described, for risk mitigation. Basically, has the company filled out the right forms? Has it stored your data safely? And it's what we used to call generalists. They are people who were there to do compliance stuff and tick boxes, basically. There's a new form of it that's much more aimed at getting good results for the business and advising it to try and help it do the right things. That's partnering, which is kind of what I do in a grand arena of it. But yeah, it's very progressive. I would say it is something like just over half genuine progressives, maybe 25% people who just are in the middle, normal everyday Joes that don't really have much in the way of political leanings. And then you've got a relatively small cadre of people like me who are at the opposite end of the spectrum that just hide our power levels a lot.
Right. And just to give proper context here, Binary, when you say over half genuinely progressive, you mean that on the, they would be outliers from the general population. These are not typical members of the populace. These are people who are extreme in their politics. Right?
Well, if not extreme in their politics, have read and uncritically embraced things like critical race theory. And it's not because they've got any direct leaning there. They've read it. They haven't got any deeper knowledge to be able to challenge it. It's the prevailing theory. They go to all the HR networking places where it's taught. Therefore, it's just accepted as dogma, and challenging it is treated as if you just told them the earth is flat.
Yeah.
Right. It's acceptance through just repetition.
Correct. And that is literally what a lot of the courses teach you. They teach they don't directly teach these theories, but they teach the tenets that have come out of them. For example, you must have a balanced representative workforce, which is great ideally, but at what cost is the sole question, again, which nobody asks.
Well, nobody ever asked that question. I hate to jump in here and just be a big giant wiener about this, but I have to go.
Yep. And you told us we had an hour, so thank you, Don.
I am going to go ahead and get out of here. Thank you for having me, guys. It has been quite a bit of fun, actually. And
thanks, Don.
I hope to see you all again, one of these days soon.
All right. Thanks, Don.
Take care.
We're going to move
Bye-bye.
right along in some chats. I'm sure they'll give us opportunities to discuss more stuff. Harry Channel, I expect that Gillette assumed that since women still control most household shopping, that they were the de facto consumer rather than the men that are the end users. That's an interesting thing, to take that market to the ones who do the shopping. Because what is it? 90% of household consumption is directed by women. Like they're the
Something
ones
like
actually going and
85%.
yeah, they're
Basically,
the ones going and making the purchases, right? Even if the
Yeah.
purchases are for their
I
husband,
think
they're the ones in
that's
the
not a
aisle
good
doing it.
strategy. It's not a good strategy because it assumes that women, again, it's collective. I guess with marketing and how you look at marketing with just demographic groups, you tend to be more collectivist. But it assumed that women as a class would act as in their class interest against men. In that commercial, like, oh, the men are being put down here. Yeah, they're being put in their place. Let's buy Gillette now, rather than understanding that no, these women are individuals and they don't hate men. Only 7% of people in the UK are feminists. I think it's like 5% in the United States. They didn't understand that people don't work as a class. It's a very Marxist way, again, corporate communism, it's a very Marxist way of looking at the world, that these women were assumed to be benefiting their class at the expense of the a male class, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I follow you. Simiagog says, yep, Cynic, the what, why, how diagram.
Yep.
I don't know if you want to try to explain it, but that's another teaser for Cynic, right?
Yeah, that's probably a whole different conversation. Anything by Sinek, I highly recommend watching if you're interested in either business theory or communication and psychology, or even neurochemistry. The other one that's worth reading for anyone in management position, I know I sent it to you before, Radlip, and you quite liked it, was the Leaders Eat Last one. There's a lot in there about psychology, safety, group behavior. It's very interesting.
Martian Pundit talks about Sargon saying the ethical corporation.
Yes, although I don't think Sargon means it in the way that a B Corp is.
Yeah.
A good example of what Sargon means is fair trade coffee, where the company has made a decision to purchase, whether or not fair trade is good, put to one side, purchase more ethically, whereas, say, a company set up purposely to eliminate food poverty due to goods trading by the banks or something like that. It's baked into the core reason of the existence for the company, which is a B Corp.
Yeah, I think you're right on that one, mate.
Do lots of crazy stuff. Teasing Mad Merc. I'll let him look through those on his own. 5G. Give me a sec.
Wait, we're not still on the 5G causes coronavirus nonsense, are we? I thought we'd.
I hope not.
I mean, don't get me wrong; it's a funny conspiracy theory, but
this is interesting. I've just been seeing some. God is in the details says this is somewhat new in that it's global in scope rather than confined to someone's own country. Now, I thought Michael Tracy, who's a progressive but an honest actor in my view, I thought he had a very interesting angle on this just in the last day or two. He said, look, this is just another aspect of U.S. imperial dominance. It's not just that the United States has military bases everywhere. It's that something we catch cold in the U.S. and everybody else sneezes, right? And that's exactly what we've been seeing. I saw the map of protests, and it's effectively a map of U.S. imperial cultural hegemony or whatever. It's Australia and it's Western Europe and it's the UK. Anyway, thoughts?
Yeah, you're not wrong. Go on, Matt.
Go ahead, Don. No, go ahead, Binary. I spoke something.
I was going to say there's everything's easy to see coming with the US. It has such large economic and cultural influence. It tends to have a disproportionate impact even on countries that aren't in the old Anglosphere, if you like. And secondly, it's really easy to see the trends coming because you tend to do everything bigger, more visibly, more grandiose is the wrong word, but you get what I'm trying to say. It's my partner used to ask me, why am I so interested in US politics? I say, well, because I can see what's coming here in 5 years' time. If I can see them do something, generally speaking, we're going to copy that to some sort of slightly lesser British degree. And lo and behold, Trump, what do we get 6 months later? We get Brexit.
Wait, no, Brexit came first, didn't it?
Other way around, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, Brexit came
but
first.
Trump's been on the cards
yeah.
for a number of years. The only reason I think you didn't get him sooner was that Obama was in a pretty sound position for his second term, and the primary went a different way. I think you could have had Trump 4 or 5, even longer. Like, I would have said that the ground's been right for him since Bush. It's Bush Jr.
I guess it's not. In talking about this global in scope thing, I generally don't tend to be very sympathetic to people who are like just hostile to multinationals, because I don't fundamentally have a problem with an organization that is international. I don't see what's ethically wrong with it. I guess the concern that people raise is that essentially they'll offload costs. They'll do something that's costly to the local community, and they don't really care because they're a global organization. If they screw that local community up, they just up and move somewhere else. I guess that's the charge, but I don't think that that's a fundamental problem with international organizations per se. But
there is a fundamental one though, and it is coming up soon with this. This movement at some point is going to reach Asia and China, where, let me tell you, they have very, very different opinions on black people. This is not.
Yeah, they do.
So
I've heard about that.
When you have, say, let's pick an easy example. Excuse me, a Japanese company that happens to be global in scope. We could all think of one or two, and have large presence in the US, and the US part is being demanded to behave a certain way, but the purse strings are held in Japan. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, they don't care.
Yeah, I think I saw some social media responses from Japan to the current stuff. Somebody was trying to guilt trip the Japanese or whatever, and they were like, "This isn't our problem. We don't care." I mean, it was really blunt and brutal.
Yeah,
but
you don't even
the
have
thing
to go
is,
that far. You can just go to the Middle East. I mean, I was involved with some stuff to do with infrastructure building in the Middle East. 2012-ish, something like that. 13, when they were building all the stadiums and the rail networks out in certain countries. And their attitude just to say sanctity of life, because we were going through this whole thing about worker safety and the rest of it then after we'd had a couple of deaths in the construction industry here. And their attitude was like, yeah, so what? People are disposable. We don't need to build barriers. Let them die. That was literally the attitude in the Middle Eastern countries.
Wow.
So you realize that, or you can't have a corporation. We had the company I worked for at the time. I had to literally say, sorry, we can't work with you if you're not willing to do this, because we have UK shareholders who have a very different value on this. And basically, we're going to get screwed.
Yeah.
Right, and the value system here is interesting, because I saw statements from both Iran and China saying that they were supporting the BLM protests and that sort of stuff, and that the United States needs to address its history of racism. Now, they obviously couldn't give two tosses about the BLM protest. All they care about is showing that America is weak, or trying to destabilize America in some sort of way. So, this is an opportunity for enemy actors to use this. They may not even believe it, but it's still an opportunity, because the United States and a broad swath of the United States believes in these sorts of values.
Let's hit another one. A completely unpronounceable username says, I am very skeptical of the idea that primary fulfillment was ever in the form of, I've worked for 20 years at this company, family, church, etc., much more important. Yeah, I don't think anyone's saying that people found their rootedness in the fact that they worked at the same company for years. To me, it's sort of a lagging indicator, right? A general breakdown in a lot of things, and instability in a lot of areas, and divorce and stuff like that. Divorce affects you a lot more than changing your job, right? Your parents getting divorced when you're a kid. We know, we scientifically can show that, or statistically, that what an impact something like that has. But it's part of a general trend of instability and difficulty of having meaningful, stable relationships that fill that vacuum. And so the vacuum is sitting there waiting for something else to get sucked into it, like political fads, right? Let's hit another one. Let's see.
Pseudonyms put a good one in there. The Chinese advert with the washing machine and the black guy. Yeah, Jesus.
Yeah.
Oh, that was whoa. I mean,
that was like,
I feel
oh my
like
God,
I feel like I'm an edgy boy, and I was like, what?
Yeah, and genuinely, I remember this one that came out a while ago. Genuinely, my mate who is part Japanese had a conversation with me about this. And he goes, basically, I don't see what's wrong with it. That was his opinion. They have never had political correctness there. It just hasn't happened.
Yeah,
I think it's because in Asian countries, not everything, but there is a subtext of racial hierarchy. So, for example, in China, the Han Chinese, the northern Chinese ethnicity, the political center, they're considered the pure Chinese, and southern Chinese, which has a different ethnicity and a different dialect of Mandarin, is considered a lesser form of Chinese, and not to mention the Tibetans and the Uyghurs, because of religious reasons, they're seen as lower Chinese, lower ethnic Chinese on this racial hierarchy, and so they try and introduce more northern ethnic Chinese down south, and they try and breed these people out in these ethnic genocidal programs, which is very horrible to see. And it goes the other way as well. So the Malaysians, they call the Chinese the Jews of Asia, because they make up 25%, something like 25% of the population, but 2/3 of the economy, money that goes in and out of the country. So this ethnic, and not to mention the Japanese and the Koreans and the Japanese and the Chinese and the Vietnamese and the Chinese, it's a whole mixed bag of racial hierarchy. But it's interesting to see these different attitudes towards race come into contact with the Western values of race. Sorry, just a tangent there.
Yeah, and that's where these internationalist companies will struggle, whereby expressing a view in one area, they're going to directly piss off another portion. I think that's going to be more difficult for them. I mean, imagine if, let's pick a cheeky example. Imagine if, let's pick the Greeks and the Turks. That's always a fun one. A Greek company comes out against Turkish products. Well, okay, well, the Greek people are going to buy it. None of the Turkish people are going to buy it. Now imagine you've got an international company that has an equal presence in both countries, and you pick a side. Yeah, good luck. That other set of assets are getting probably nationalized at some point. You're probably going to lose your entire customer base in that country. At some point, picking a side becomes a net game, and the more I think about it, the more I think Don is probably onto something with his point about that, unless you consider that the table that you're playing the game at is about to close. Someone's going to walk away with all the chips.
Right.
Here's another one or a little more on B Corp from Simagog. B Corp is important because what matters for companies is tax designation. B Corp is a tax designation. Right. There's these different ways you can incorporate, right? And I guess they've now made a legal category for this new kind of ethical company or whatever, and you're going to get a tax break if you do it that way, probably.
I wasn't aware of that, so that's basically directly incentivizing whatever form of philanthropic or activism you particularly buy into as that company.
Right, and this I think that's an example of the governments with good intention to promote, charitable action having a unforeseen consequence.
Here's an interesting point. I've been seeing a couple of people making this point. Robin Watertree, African American aesthetics have spread to all countries along with American media. So even diaspora Africans as far afield as Ukraine adopt the BLM narrative as their own. Right. So, I remember my dad coming back from Israel and saying that there were posters of Elvis Presley in the bus or something. It's like American popular culture goes global. And what has American popular culture been producing in recent times? Well, a lot of rap, right? I think that's gone pretty global. It's considered the cool the cool music for the kids to a great degree. I think rap is something that's, I've heard French rappers. I mean, it's not just an American thing by any means. It is not even just an Anglophone thing. It's broader than that. And what Robin is arguing here is that along with those cultural exports, you get some political exports with it, right?
Yeah, you're not wrong. No cultural export is entirely free of politics, whether they're large or small. It's going to be baked in there to some degree. You can't strip it out without destroying the product. The way I like that person's avatar. That's a good one.
I didn't catch it. Who is it supposed to be?
Perhaps we could get a few. Sorry, go ahead.
An old English lady with a very prim and proper pose with her finger extended and a smile. I like it.
Perhaps we could just hit a few more of the major ones, like from Semiagog or from Pseudonym, because we are running out of time.
Yep. Robin Watertree, Sony America is cucked, judging from their handling of censorship and localization. So we'll see. Let's see.
The American division of Sony has had a political agenda for a long time now. And if you don't believe me, just have a look at The Last of Us 2.
That thing's a shit show if the reviews are to be believed.
Yeah, I know, right?
Pseudonym.
Just quickly random on that topic. Interestingly, I noticed that quite a few of these companies that come out as woke, and Nike being the prime example that springs to mind, have absolutely no ethical ground to stand on. Nike being a company that's basically made its fortune in child sweatshops for a long time.
Well,
that assumes that you think child sweatshops are a bad thing. I tend to disagree with that, but
yeah, I have a co-author who's written in defense of sweatshops.
I've heard of
this
defense, but I think we can all agree that whether or not they do some good, it's probably not something to be making moral lectures on if you do.
Maybe.
Yeah, probably not.
Let's
not
see.
A good PR look.
Idle Time says read Seoul on the overseas Chinese. Yes, I don't know why that was relevant to what we were talking about, but I agree that is
Jews
really interesting. The Jews of Asia, yeah, absolutely. They're very
By the way,
entrepreneurial.
just for anyone who sees this later on, we're not race realists at all. That's just the term that the Malaysians use.
That's what they call them. Yeah.
Not for the record, stating it now, I've said it before. I am a civic nationalist, not an ethnic one.
Right.
Yes.
The overseas Chinese is interesting because if you're in the West, you probably are familiar with Chinese being entrepreneurial, but they're not. They don't have the dominance in the economy that we're used to ascribing to, say, Jewish people who are very big in the United States among lawyers and things like this, right? Well, that kind of thing that we're used to ascribing to Jewish people in Western economies, go over to Malaysia, and that's Chinese. The Chinese are the lawyers. The Chinese are the ones making all the money from the businesses, and the indigenous population, or whatever, that considers itself indigenous, views the Chinese suspiciously, like, why do you have all the money in our society? Why do you have so much control? So think of all like the anti-Semitic conspiracies you've ever heard. Go over to Malaysia, change Jew to Chinese, and you can probably just replay those same kinds of things. The Chinese control everything.
And add active discrimination through governmental policy. And then
against the Chinese, actually, yes, yeah, it's written into like the Malaysian law that Chinese are discriminated against and they can't like go to the schools or something. I don't know. It's crazy stuff, but it's a really nice perspective to understand that some of these same patterns play out with completely different ethnic groups. I don't know what that tells you, but it seems interesting. Pseudonyms. Go ahead.
Into the psychology again, there isn't there of people and their tribal nature, but.
Right. Pseudonym says that's why Disney removed the black guy from the Star Wars poster. Whoa, I saw that.
Yeah, it was shameless as well, wasn't it?
John Boyega is the actor, right? His name has been being bounced around a bit in the current things.
I know. I'm kind of disappointed in him, given the level of success he's attained in his response to this movement. I get you had had a shitty childhood where people may have shouted unpleasant things at you in the street, but you've passed that now. You should be pointing out to everyone that theoretically, if they really want to go for it hard enough, they could too. Not telling them that they're never going to be more than this, which is essentially what the message you're giving them is. I thought it was deeply disappointing.
I don't see him as based. Sorry, tangent. I know we only have limited time, but I don't see him as based. I think the stuff about Star Wars was self-interested because they really did screw his character over and didn't give him much to do. And he really felt personally betrayed from that. And I think it was just personal. It had nothing to do with his politics.
Maybe.
I am going to share. So, a co-author of mine on an economics article actually did write on sweatshops. So, I'm just going to throw that forward. This is a popular article, so it's accessible. Immigrant Sweatshops and Standards of Living by Art Carden, who, along with me, wrote an article with Walter Block, who, if it's a little inside joke among Austrians, everyone has written an article with Walter Block. So it's no big feather in our cap. But anyway, Art's got an article on sweatshops. So there were a couple comments near the end. Martian Pundit says, I had an AP English exam that included an article on defensive sweatshops, red-pilled several of my classmates. So we're not going to dig into that topic. But anyway, we're going to wrap it up, actually. I don't mind binary on these things. I consider this sort of a somewhat scholarly kind of angle in this show. We often are like literally going through a scholarly article. I don't mind raising questions and suggesting answers, but not feeling like we have it all nailed down. I think we brought up a lot of things that are worthy of consideration about the spiritual vacuum that people are filling with politics, and that includes companies themselves trying to find a deeper meaning to what they do. You know, we don't just make a widget. We fight for social justice, right? That becomes a part of the self-identity and the psychology of what's going on. But then also, the government is incentivizing certain behavior, as we've discussed. We learned about B Corps from Semiagog. Thanks for that pointer. I'm going to want to learn more about that. And we also know, of course, there's been this long march through the institutions of the left, and that they have succeeded in creating a center of gravity that keeps going to the left, right? And everything seems to be getting drawn along in that. Obviously, the universities, which we've been discussing in recent years, but now you just can't miss it. The big companies are being drawn along towards that leftward center of gravity. They are going to jump in on these things, which, to be blunt, I mean, a lot of people, I think, are taking this Black Lives Matter and just saying, well, yeah, I think Black lives do matter. I'm not a racist, right? But you dig just beneath the surface of that nice sounding thing, and you find an organization that's devoted to communism and defeating capitalism, right? And so how could a big company be any part of that? Well, last thoughts, Binary?
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's okay not to have all the answers on something. That's kind of the principle I try and work with. That I might have grasped the thread that's relevant. I probably haven't grasped the whole thing, because most, again, Soul talks a lot about this, most problems are multifarious. There's not a single axis that you can define them by. There's multiple things in play. I do think that this shift is probably a relatively dangerous one, in that there is going to be a winner and loser out of this, where before the system has revolved. And my personal problem with the whole BLM and woke capitalism thing is, it's not a problem with the woke capitalism piece per se. It's a problem with the racial consciousness this is awakening in other groups who didn't have one before, and frankly shouldn't have had one, in my opinion. As you say, you scratch the surface with BLM, and then you have the sentiment, which most people go, yeah, sure they do. Same as whatever other ethnicity you choose to insert here does. Right. Of course it does. That's what every reasonable person would say. But the minute you scratch the surface of the organization, you find what is basically a gang of black supremacists founded by a multiple cop killer, taking large amounts of donations and funneling them to the Democratic campaign. That should probably worry most people.
Yeah, and that it's funny about that because I see, my favorite leftist on Twitter is Caitlin Johnston from Australia, and I often mention her because I think she's pretty sharp on foreign policy, for example. Um, but man, she is all on board on this BLM stuff, and I'm thinking she hates the Democrats. She sees them as, not sufficiently progressive. She hates Biden. Well, where's all this BLM money going? As we, I think, recently found out, right? There's some sort of shell company. Okay, there's some sort of shell company that holds the donations that are given to BLM, and if it isn't used for BLM, then it just goes right to blue. Oh, it's called. It has blue in it.
Blue Act Blue, something like that.
Yeah, right. That's right. And it basically it's not even a very subtle shell game. They didn't have to dig into multiple companies or something.
But why would you spend time and effort hiding something when the entire press is cheerleading you? Why waste the effort?
I guess my point is you've got some like people who view themselves as hostile to the Democrats because they're to the left of the Democrats. That's how they view themselves. And they're all over this BLM thing. And I'm thinking, you're getting suckered. This money is going to the Democrats.
I got to disagree with you there.
Okay.
They're not. The reason being is that this is all about one step at a time. The reason the left has been so successful is that they haven't tried to, in their tactics over the last 30 years, they haven't tried to take everything at one time. Like the right, we usually try and tackle a number of issues all at once in a single period of time. Whereas the left, they just take little bites over time, slowly devouring the host. And what this is just that the same tactic over and over again. And yes, they'll support BLM. They're not far left enough, but they're left enough for the moment. And just we're moving the Overton window more to the left, and we keep going more to the left. And this is all about tactics, long-term tactics.
And it's a good tactic, don't get me wrong, in that so the right typically takes a problem and goes, well, okay, let's understand it, let's break it down, let's look at how we might solve this problem, and typically, as you say, as a result, comes up with multiple things that need to be done, and then tries to do them all, which is creating a lot of change at once that makes people uncomfortable, which is typically why you see large amounts of resistance to most right policies. It's not the actual policy, it's the amount of change you're trying to do at one time. Most people have a finite stress tolerance for this kind of thing, and the left seems to innately understand that. I think it's more a byproduct of its what I call one-dimensional thinking, but what it does is it pushes until you squeak, and when you start to squeak, it backs off and goes, okay, not that thing, and then it waits until you've calmed down a bit, and it comes back a bit later and goes, well, now maybe a bit of that thing. Okay, well, I'll go along with a bit of it. Well, now maybe a bit more. No, too much. All right, I'll go away. I'll come back again. And it's just this gradual, you wait until you hit resistance, you back away. I think that's what's probably alarmed me most here is that they've hit resistance. This time they've just gone, yeah, fuck it, carry on.
Well, I think it's it's either a mistake or they're going for the kill. Because if you're meeting resistance and you don't care about it, either you know something that the other person doesn't, or you're putting all your chips on the table and this is your last gambit.
Yeah, there's so something you may not know about me. I did a lot of sword work once upon a time, Aido. Really enjoyed it, really fun. But there's a concept in it in that you only commit to the blow if you're sure the blow will land, because committing to a blow that doesn't land and is either deflected or dodged leaves you completely open for a counter-strike. So and most people innately understand this in fighting, in conversations, everything else. If you really go for it, you better land that or you're going to be feeling the backswing.
Take the king. If you're going to go after the king, take him.
Correct. Don't miss or it's going to hurt. And that's the similar thing here. So as Mad says, they've either just massively overreached or they sense an opportunity to rip the throat out, so to speak.
Yep. Yeah, and they've been right a lot, but then they've been wrong a lot recently as well. I think with Brexit and Trump and stuff like that. So we'll see.
There's no way to know until we get there. I think we'll get there in a couple of months' time. At the rate things are going, certainly before the November election, we'll see where this game is playing out or not. It's going to be interesting, man. With Biden versus Trump, that is going to be I mean, dear God, can you imagine Biden versus Trump in a debate?
I don't think
what they're
Biden
going
lasts
to
the
do.
debate. To be quite
They're
frank,
going to try to dodge it or something. I don't know. They're going to change the
Can
rules as usual.
Can I ask you something, Binary? In
Yeah.
Radical Liberation, sorry, in your guys' professional opinion, the next 2 years, where do you see this going? I understand we're in a time where everything's moving very fast, but in the general flow, where do you, not specifics, but just the general flow of where this is all headed, in your opinion, in the corporate world, where does this head?
I'd love to say that there's a backlash coming and a return to sanity, and they're going to just realize, hey, we need to get out of politics. But that is not what I'm seeing at all. Everybody's doubling down.
I think we're halfway down the slide at the moment, and clawing for the top again is difficult. Much easier to ride it out to the bottom, is my suspicion. I think we'll see there'll be two kinds of corporations. There'll either be those that are on the train or with the progressives, or those that are strictly apolitical. I don't think you'll see any kind of snap back to the right. There'll be either corporations who say, we do not comment on anything political, full stop, under any circumstances, and draw that line, or they'll be on the progressive train, so to speak. And my anticipation is you'll actually see some sort of legal requirement passed on companies over a certain size in your country. We already have it. We are in this country required to provide diversity data once a company is over a certain size, if it's listed on a stock exchange. You will have the same, and I think the law that will follow behind that is, if your diversity is not matching some degree of relevance to your local employment market, you will probably end up with something like not being able to list, or being forcibly delisted, or somewhere in those lines of it, where you are basically ejected from whatever market you're in.
Yeah, effectively political requirements for doing business.
Kind of, yeah. I think that's where we're going.
Yeah. Okay, well, I want to wrap it up. I wanted to thank Lumberg and Pseudonym. Things were getting a little crazy in the chat, and so I gave them the wrench, and they got things a little more relevant to what we wanted to talk about. So thanks for that. And thanks to Binary for joining us. I really appreciate it. This is a late night for you where you are.
Not a problem. Pleasure to be here and good to chat.
All right. And thank you, Madmerk, as always. Okay. Bye, guys.
See you in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.